name's Cass. I'm here at the UCF Climbing Tower, and I'm here to teach you a little bit about climbing and how it works. So you might be wondering, what do you need for climbing? So the things that you need are a pair of climbing shoes and a harness if you want to do what we call top rope. But you might be wondering, what the heck is top rope? And what is any of this? Don't worry, we're going to get to it. So here is the wall. When you're thinking about bouldering routes are going to be anything that is below this orange line here on the tower, whereas top ropes are going to be things that go all the way up to the top of the tower, which is why we call it top rope. Another thing is with these shorter routes that we call boulders is that you don't have to be tied in for them, so you just fall onto the ground. And with top rope, you have to be tied in to a rope. When you're thinking about bouldering, you might be a little scared. Oh, I'm supposed to just fall on the ground and have no rope protecting me. Well, in climbing gyms, the floors are always soft and padded. We also have these things called crash pads, which are just big foam pads that you just fall on top of. And when you're falling while you're bouldering, you want to make sure to clench up your hands and put your arms in tight to your chest and roll backwards onto your back rather than rolling forwards. If you roll forwards, you have the potential of hitting your head on the wall, which would be pretty bad, so don't do that. You can also utilize a spotter, so this person kind of stands a little bit behind you and supports your hips. They don't have their hands on you, but they're just there to make sure that you don't hit your head on anything. So they shouldn't be like grabbing your body or anything, but they should just have their hands there to make sure that your head lands on something nice and soft. Alright, so now talking about climbing shoes. So these climbing shoes are lace-ups. So you just shove your foot on the inside and then you tie them like you would any other shoe. Some climbing shoes are Velcro, and so they have Velcro straps. So you undo the Velcro, put your foot in, and then tighten them down. An important thing to note with climbing shoes is that they shouldn't fit like regular shoes. They should make your feet a little bit uncomfortable. And that's because you kind of want your toes to be a little squishy together so they can come to a nice point. And this is so that way your feet can be more precise on smaller holds. Now, you shouldn't feel like your feet are like dying. It shouldn't be super painful, but a little bit of uncomfort is okay. That's totally normal with climbing shoes. This here is our harness. So these bottom loops are for your legs, and this big loop here is for your waist. You step into it like it's a pair of pants. And the biggest thing here, so these leg loops are auto adjustable. They don't have any buckles or anything, so the elastic just kind of auto adjusts. But some of them have buckles where you'll need to pull the fabric through a buckle and then cinch it down to tighten it, similar to how this waist belt works. So you'll want to pull this material up and through and then pull it this way in order to tighten it. Now you want this to be above your pelvis, and you want it to be nice and tightened down, because this is what is keeping you on the wall and keeping you from falling. So you don't want to be able, if your harness is on and you can stick your fist through the gap between your harness and your body, that means it is not tight enough. Now you don't want it so tight that it's constricting you and feel like you can't breathe, but if you can fit a couple fingers in there, that's okay, but no more than that. Another thing to talk about with climbing is the rating system. So our top rope routes use what we call the Yosemite Decimal System, which starts with a 5. So Yosemite Decimal System is a system designated to talk about elevation. So class 1 is flat. Class 2 is a little bit of a hill. Class 3 is kind of scrambling, but you may or may not need rope or some gear to help you. Class 4 is intense scrambling, where you definitely need a rope to help you. And Class 5 is straight up vertical, which is what we're dealing with in rock climbing. Now, the best way to remember grades in rock climbing is that the lower the number, the easier it is. So in climbing gyms, typically the easiest ones are 5.6s and the hardest are 5.12. But in outdoor climbing, you can see ones as easy as 5.0 all the way up to professional, very elite climbers who climb 5.16s. But you won't really see this in the indoor environment. So for example, here we have a 5.7, a 5.8, and a 5.10. The way that we categorize these is usually through color coding. If you're a colorblind person like myself, this can make things a little bit tricky sometimes, but that's okay. We do our best. So yeah, with bouldering, we use the V scale. So same thing, higher number equals harder. So a V0 is the absolute easiest, and I think the hardest one outdoors is maybe a V17, but in the indoor environment you don't typically see anything harder than a V12. So when you're climbing at most climbing gyms, top rope routes and bouldering routes will typically have a plastic tag with tape that will say the grade of the route. This is what we call a two-hand start, so 2 hands on this one hold. But sometimes you have 2 separate holds in the case of this 5-6. So you have 1 hand here and 1 hand there, and you must start with your hands on the proper start holds. And then this is an example of this with a boulder. So you'd want to start with both of your hands on this if you were trying to attempt this V4. When you are doing top rope, you will need someone called a belayer. I'm not going to teach how to belay or everything about that because it's a really complicated skill that takes time. But suffice it to say that you will need someone who ties you into one end of the rope using the knot we call the figure 8 follow through, and then they will use this other rope that comes down and loop it through a thing called a belay device, which I can insert a picture of somewhere on the screen. And then from there, once you're tied in, you would do our belay commands, and this is just how we make sure that everything is safe. So climber will say on belay. The belayer will check their carabiners to make sure that their carabiners are properly locked. And then once they do, they'll say belay is on. Then you approach the wall, you get ready to touch the start hold, and before you start climbing, you say climbing. And then when the belayer is ready for you to start climbing, they will say climb on. It's very important. Climbing is an inherently risky activity, so you're going to make sure that you and your belayer are on the same page and that everything is good to go before you get on the wall. And as I said before, climbing routes are color-coded, so if you wanted to climb this V2 here, you would only want to touch holds that are this color. If you touch this hold, for example, you'd be considered off-route, or what we call rainbowing. So you can do that if you want to, but technically you're not climbing the route. So if you want to say that you sent this V2, you wouldn't be able to say that because you used things that weren't a part of the V2. Now it's time for the most important part of this lesson, jargon, because we love that, right? So climbers, we have a lot of silly words that we use when we're at the wall, one of them being beta. So beta is advice on how to properly complete a climb. And then we have this idea of what we call spraying beta, which is when you're giving unsolicited advice to someone while they're on a climb. This is generally considered poor behavior. So if you want to give someone beta, you should ask for their consent rather than just spraying beta at them. Another thing that we say is we talk about topping a route. So topping a route is when you complete the route, you might have fallen a few times, but you did still top it. Whereas sending a route is when you climb the whole route and you don't fall whatsoever. And we also have this other concept of a flash. And flashing a route is the first time that you try to climb it, you do it all in one go and you do not fall at all. So it's your first time. Now, if you, on your second time, climb it all in one go and don't fall, that is not considered a flash. That's considered a send. And then, of course, just to clarify with route refers to any specific set of holds of a particular color that have been set as a purpose to complete together. So we say a boulder route is in a short little route on the wall that isn't typically more than 15 feet. And there's a top rope route, which is typically, they can be huge. I mean, some of them are like 30 feet, some of them are hundreds of feet tall. In this particular gym, our top rope routes range from like 30 to 40 feet tall. So that isn't everything you need to know about climbing completely all over the world. There's definitely more details that I haven't included. This is an intense skill, especially when you get into outdoor climbing and things like lead climbing and trad climbing, where you're like placing equipment on the wall in order to continue to climb up. Those things are a lot more complicated, but this is at least a base level that gives you enough knowledge to where you can walk into any climbing gym and know what's going on, and even have some of the cool lingo that us climbers use. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd love to see you out there on the wall.